Some kids grow up in houses where the walls are blank or filled with family photos spread evenly among siblings. In our house, the walls were practically a shrine to my sister. Emma framed certificates, honor roll ribbons, art projects she'd brought home from elementary school. Every square foot seemed to celebrate something she'd done. There wasn't a single space that reflected me unless you counted the occasional group picture where I stood off to the side. Emma was older by 7 years, and in those years she'd claimed the role of family star. Mom and Dad called her our achiever, our bright one, or simply our pride and joy. I didn't even get a nickname. I was just Olivia. I wore her clothes after she outgrew them, whether they fit or not. Every winter, a new coat would arrive for Emma, and her old one-buttons hanging by threads, sleeves frayed, would end up in my closet. Birthdays meant gifts that were practical, which usually translated to something Emma had used before. A backpack with ink stains from her high school days, a bike with peeling paint, and a seat worn thin from years of her rides. At school, I learned to keep quiet. Teachers who'd had Emma before me would beam and say, "Oh, you're her sister. She was so talented." I'd smile, nod, and never mention that I didn't share her knack for science fairs or spelling bees. Even our dinner conversations revolved around her. If she had a soccer game, we all discussed her goals. If she'd aced a test, it became the centerpiece of the evening. If I'd had a good day, it might get a polite, "That's nice," before the conversation veered back to Emma's plans for the weekend. I didn't realize how much I'd faded into the background until one afternoon in middle school. I brought home a drawing I'd worked on for weeks, my first attempt at charcoal shading. I left it on the kitchen counter, hoping Mom might frame it or at least hang it on the fridge. That night, when I came back for a glass of water, it was gone. I found it later in the recycling bin, folded in half, sitting under a stack of junk mail. I never said a word. By then, I'd already learned the truth in our house. My needs and achievements came second. Always. And that truth only became sharper the day Emma announced she was getting married. Emma announced her engagement on a Sunday afternoon, sweeping into the living room like she'd stepped out of a bridal magazine. Michael proposed. She squealed, holding up her hand so the diamond could catch every bit of light. Mom gasped, tears already welling up, while Dad slapped Michael on the back like he'd just been inducted into some secret club. I sat on the edge of the couch, smiling faintly, waiting for someone to acknowledge me. Emma eventually turned and said, "You'll be my bridesmaid, right?" I nodded. "Of course. Congratulations." In the weeks that followed, the wedding became the family's entire universe. Fabric swatches, cake tastings, endless conversations about venues, our dining table disappeared under glossy magazines and color charts. One night, coming home late from my part-time job at the coffee shop, I heard Mom and Dad in the kitchen, voices low. "We'll have to take out a loan," Dad said. "I know." Mom replied, her tone resigned but determined. "But it's Emma's big day. We can't let her down." The words lodged in my chest. A loan for flowers and chair covers and a dress she'd wear once. I thought about my own savings account, barely enough for textbooks next semester, and bit my tongue. My opinions didn't carry much weight here. The wedding day arrived like a page ripped from a luxury bridal catalog. Emma floated down the aisle in lace and satin, looking every bit the princess. Our parents beamed from the front row, their smiles wide enough to split their faces. I stood in the background holding my bouquet, smiling when the photographer pointed the camera my way. No one saw the way my feet ached in the heels I'd bought secondhand, or how small I felt compared to the grandeur surrounding her. By the time the reception ended, the decision had already been made for me. Whatever the cost, they would always find a way to give Emma more. And that truth deepened a few months later when she announced she was expecting twins. Emma made her next announcement over Sunday dinner, placing her hands on her stomach with a dramatic pause. "We're having twins," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Mom nearly dropped the serving spoon, and Dad's face lit up like Christmas morning. "2 babies." Mom clapped her hands. "We'll have to start looking for a bigger house for you right away." I blinked. A bigger house. They'll need the space. Dad explained, already launching into a list of neighborhoods. "We can help with the down payment. That colonial near the park just came on the market. Perfect for kids." I stared at my plate, trying to process the fact that they were ready to shell out thousands of dollars for a second home when they were still paying off Emma's wedding. The knot in my chest tightened, but I swallowed my frustration. A few weeks later, after the house purchase was finalized, I decided to bring up my own needs. "I've been looking at colleges," I said cautiously over breakfast. "I'd like to apply this fall. Could you help with tuition?" They exchanged a glance I'd seen 100 times before, the one that meant the answer would come with conditions. "Well," Dad said, "we can probably cover half, with the loan for the wedding and helping with the house money's tight." Half, the same parents who'd just written a check for Emma's dream home, could only spare half for my education. I managed a small thanks before retreating to my room, the walls closing in tighter than ever. That fall, I enrolled in the local community college, the only option I could afford. To cover the rest, I took a job waitressing at a diner on the edge of town. My days blurred into lectures, late-night shifts, and aching feet. And just when I thought I'd found a rhythm, Emma started showing up on weekends with the twins in tow. The first time Emma showed up unannounced, it was a Saturday afternoon. I'd just finished a grueling week of midterms and double shifts at the diner. My plan was simple: sleep, maybe catch up on laundry, and not speak to anyone unless I had to. Instead, the doorbell rang, and there she was, twins on each hip diaper bag hanging off her shoulder. "You're a lifesaver, Olivia," she said before I could even open my mouth. "Michael and I haven't had a date night in forever. We'll be back in a few hours." I started to protest, but she was already halfway down the front steps. That few hours turned into 6, and by the time they returned, my apartment looked like a tornado had passed through. Emma scooped up the boys, kissed their cheeks, and breezed out the door without so much as a thank you. It didn't stop there. Soon, every weekend became a repeat performance. Sometimes she'd give me 10 minutes warning. Other times, I'd come home from work to find the twins already inside, my mom letting herself in with the spare key. "This is what family does," she'd say, handing me a sippy cup as if that settled it. "Besides, it's good practice for when you have your own kids." I wanted to scream. I was barely keeping my head above water, lectures during the day, waitressing at night, and mountains of homework in between. My social life was non-existent. Friends eventually stopped inviting me out because my answer was always the same: "I can't. I'm babysitting." The resentment grew quietly, at first tucked between folding tiny clothes and reheating chicken nuggets. But by the 3rd month, it was a constant hum in the back of my mind. No one asked if I wanted to help. No one offered to swap weekends or give me a break. I was a built-in babysitter, nothing more. And no matter how exhausted I was, the expectation never changed. By the time I realized I couldn't keep living like this, I was already making plans for my first real break in years, a cheap trip that I hoped would finally be mine alone. By the time spring rolled around, I was running on fumes. My days blurred into a relentless loop of classes, diner shifts, and weekend babysitting marathons. The thought of a break felt almost dangerous, like if I stopped moving, I might not be able to start again. One night after my shift ended, I sat in the corner booth with my phone and a cup of stale coffee. Scrolling through budget travel sites, I found a rundown but charming hotel in a nearby city, walking distance from a museum I'd always wanted to visit. 3 nights ocean view if you leaned far enough over the balcony, and just barely within my price range. I booked it before I could talk myself out of it. When I told my parents, they actually seemed supportive. "Good for you, honey," Mom said, smiling like she'd just discovered I was capable of independent thought. "You deserve some time to yourself." I should have known better. The first day of my trip, I stepped off the bus with my overnight bag and a rare lightness in my chest. The hotel was exactly as described: faded carpet, squeaky doors, but clean. I dropped my bag on the bed and headed out for lunch at a little cafe, savoring every moment of silence. When I returned, voices echoed down the hall. Familiar voices. My stomach sank. Surprise. Mom beamed as she stepped out of the room next to mine. Emma was behind her, the twins squirming in her arms. "What are you doing here?" I managed. "Oh, we thought it would be fun to make it a family trip," Emma said, already nudging the boys toward me. "They've been dying to see the city. Michael and I want to explore a bit, maybe grab dinner. You don't mind watching them, do you?" Before I could answer, Mom chimed in, "We'll be back soon." And they disappeared down the hallway. The next 48 hours were a nightmare. The twins tore through my small hotel room like they were competing for destruction points. They pulled the curtains down, shattered 2 glasses, and somehow managed to flush a plastic toy down the toilet, which resulted in a plumbing bill I had to cover before checking out. By the time they left, I was more exhausted than when I'd arrived. My so-called escape had turned into another weekend of unpaid childcare, only now it had cost me money I didn't have. On the bus ride home, one thought kept looping in my head: something had to change. The morning after my vacation, I woke up in my own bed feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My muscles ached from chasing the twins around, and my bank account balance sat in the double digits after paying for the hotel damages. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of every unpaid hour, every hijacked weekend pressing down. By the time I walked into the kitchen, the decision had already settled in my chest. Mom was making coffee, Dad flipping through the paper. Emma's latest text, another babysitting request, lit up my phone. I turned it face down. "I'm moving out," I said. Mom's head snapped up. "What? Don't be ridiculous." "I'm serious, I've been looking for places. I found one I can afford with a roommate." "You can't just leave," she said, her voice rising. "Who's going to help your sister with the twins?" "Her husband," I shot back. Dad set his paper down, his jaw tightening. "If you walk out, don't expect us to keep paying for school. You'll be on your own." I felt my pulse in my ears, but the fear that used to keep me in place wasn't there this time. "Then I'll be on my own." The conversation ended with slammed cabinet doors and the kind of silence that's louder than shouting. 2 weeks later, I was hauling my life into a second-floor walk-up across town. The place smelled faintly of old paint and dust, but it was mine or ours technically, since my roommate Sarah was already stacking her moving boxes in the living room. I picked up extra shifts at the diner to cover rent, sacrificing what little free time I had. The exhaustion was bone deep. My meals were whatever I could heat in a microwave at midnight, and my bed was a mattress on the floor. But no one knocked on my door with 2 toddlers in tow. No one made me feel like my time belonged to them. Every morning, I woke up knowing I'd bought myself something that had never been handed to me choice. And for the first time, I started to wonder what my life might look like if I built it entirely for me. 2 years after I'd left home, I crossed the stage at graduation to the sound of polite applause from strangers. I scanned the crowd instinctively, even though I knew no one from my family was there. The seat I'd reserved stayed empty, my name echoing in the auditorium without a familiar voice to catch it. When the ceremony ended, I took photos with classmates, forcing a smile for the camera. The pride I felt was real, but it came with an ache, one I knew would never fully go away. A week later, I accepted an entry-level position at a small marketing firm downtown. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was enough to let me move out of the shared apartment and into a place that was completely mine. My new home was a studio with creaky floorboards, chipped cabinets, and a view of the alley behind a bakery. I loved it instantly. With weekends finally mine, I started exploring nearby towns, hopping on buses to places I'd only read about. I walked farmers markets, hiked short trails, and lingered in used bookstores without worrying about when I had to be back. The absence of constant demands was almost startling. At first, I'd catch myself waiting for the phone to ring for someone to ask me to drop everything and watch the twins. But as the months passed, the silence became something I treasured. Emma still called occasionally, usually with a request disguised as a casual check-in. I kept the conversation short, always citing work or prior plans. My parents and I spoke even less. The distance between us wasn't just physical anymore. It was a kind of buffer I'd built to protect myself. For the first time, my days were mine to fill, and I didn't realize how fiercely I valued that until my 25th birthday, when they showed up with a gift that threatened to pull me right back in. My 25th birthday was low-key, just dinner plans with a few friends at a neighborhood restaurant. A week before, Mom called, her voice unusually bright. "We want you to come over on your birthday," she said. "The whole family will be here. We have something special for you." Against my better judgment, I went. When I walked into their living room, the twins were chasing each other around the coffee table, Emma and Michael, chatting with my parents like nothing had changed. After cake and small talk, Mom handed me a large envelope. "This she said, smiling like she'd just handed me a winning lottery ticket, is from all of us. Inside was a glossy packet for an all-expenses-paid trip to another city. The highlight, 2 nights in a hotel and tickets to a massive outdoor concert. "We leave in 3 weeks," Dad announced. "It'll be so much fun, all of us together." Emma leaned in, grinning. "The boys are going to love it. It'll be great for them to have you there." Michael and I might sneak away to explore the city a bit. There, it was the real reason. I could already picture the weekend me stuck in a hotel room trying to corral 2 sugar-charged 8-year-olds while everyone else enjoyed the show. I smiled just enough to pass for grateful. Wow, that's generous. What they didn't know was that 2 weeks earlier, I'd bought my own ticket to a completely different destination, a quiet coastal town a few states away where the loudest thing I'd hear would be waves hitting the shore. My plan had been set long before this gift appeared. Now it had just taken on an extra layer of satisfaction. I closed the envelope, thanked them all, and let them believe they'd just given me the best present of my life. In 3 weeks, we'd all go to the airport together, only I wouldn't be getting on their plane. The morning of the trip, I met them at the airport curbside. Mom was buzzing with energy, Dad juggling suitcases, Emma and Michael already talking about all the sightseeing they'd do. The twins clung to their backpacks, and I could feel their expectant eyes on me. As we moved toward the check-in line, I put a hand to my stomach. "I'm just going to run to the restroom," I said casually. "You go ahead and get checked in. I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded, distracted by luggage tags and boarding passes. I turned down the concourse, my steps quickening until I reached another terminal. The sign for my gate coastal town boarding in 30 minutes was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in months. At the counter, I handed over my ID and my real ticket. No one called after me. No one stopped me. Within minutes, I was sliding into my seat by the window. The quiet hum of the plane, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just left behind. Before switching off my phone, I typed a single message to Mom. "I'm not coming with you. Enjoy your trip." The response was immediate angry texts, voicemails my name in all caps. I didn't read past the first few lines. The words, selfish and ungrateful, blurred together until they meant nothing. A flight attendant offered me champagne and I accepted. As the plane taxied, I sipped slowly, watching the runway stretch ahead. The knot in my chest began to loosen. By the time we lifted into the airport was a memory. And for the first time in years, so was the weight of their expectations. That week was everything I'd imagined. Morning walks along the shore, afternoons exploring small shops, evenings lingering over dinners without watching the clock. I met people whose only expectations were to share a laugh or a conversation. No demands, no obligations. When I returned, the calm didn't last long. 2 days later, there was pounding at my door. Mom and Emma stormed in, voices sharp, accusing me of ruining their trip and abandoning my responsibilities. I let them talk until the noise became one continuous blur. "I don't owe you anything," I said, finally my voice even. "Not my time, not my money, and definitely not my weekends. If you want childcare, hire someone. I'm not it." They stared at me, stunned, as I walked to the door and opened it. "You can leave now." Within a month, I'd signed a lease on a new apartment in a different part of town. I didn't give them my address. My time filled with work, painting classes, and planning my next trip, this time without a secret exit strategy. The door between us had finally closed. Whether it stayed locked or not was no longer up to them. Olivia learns the power of reclaiming her autonomy and prioritizing her own needs. Growing up overshadowed by her sister Emma's achievements, she internalizes a sense of invisibility, her time and aspirations consistently sidelined. Through the painful realization that her family's expectations, endless babysitting, sacrificing her plans will never relent, she chooses to break free. By moving out, pursuing her education, and defying their demands with a secret trip, Olivia discovers that her worth isn't tied to their approval. She embraces the freedom to build a life on her terms, valuing choice over obligation.
The morning of my graduation from Stanford's computer science program should have been the proudest day of my life. Instead, I was sitting in my dorm room staring at a text from my father. Don't expect us to attend. You've made your choice. My choice. As if choosing to study computer science instead of following in his footsteps as a corporate lawyer was some kind of betrayal. As if building something meaningful with technology was somehow beneath the Morrison family name. I had worked 4 years for this moment. 4 years of coding until 3 a.m., surviving on coffee and determination, building apps that actually help people while my classmates partied. 4 years of my parents telling me I was wasting my potential and playing with toys, while my sister Emma pursued her MBA at Wharton, their golden child who could do no wrong. But they came anyway. Not for me but for appearances. The Morrison family couldn't have people asking why they missed their daughter's graduation from one of the most prestigious tech programs in the world. Image was everything to my parents, and an absent family at graduation would raise questions they didn't want to answer. I spotted them in the audience as I lined up with my fellow graduates. Dad in his perfectly tailored navy suit, Mom in her designer dress and pearls, both of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Emma sat between them, resplendent in her own cap and gown. She was graduating from her MBA program the same day, which explained their reluctant presence. Sarah Morrison, I heard my mom say to the woman next to her, pointing at Emma. Summa cum laude MBA from Wharton. We're so proud. The woman smiled politely. And your other daughter? Mom's smile tightened. Oh, she studies computers. Computers. Like I was some kind of hobbyist tinkering in a garage instead of someone who had spent 4 years mastering algorithms, artificial intelligence and software architecture. Like the 3 patents I already held meant nothing. Like the startup I'd been quietly building meant nothing. As we walked across the stage, I watched Emma receive her diploma to enthusiastic applause from our parents. When my turn came, I heard polite clapping, the kind you give a stranger. I caught my father's eye as I accepted my diploma. He was checking his watch. After the ceremony, families gathered on the lawn for photos and celebration. I watched Emma pose with our parents, their smiles genuine and proud. I stood apart, watching my own family celebrate my sister's achievement while treating my graduation like an obligation they'd fulfilled. Sarah. Emma called out, finally noticing me. Come take pictures with us. I walked over and Dad immediately put his arm around Emma while Mom fussed with her cap. I stood slightly apart, and I could see in the photos later that I looked like a distant relative who'd been reluctantly included. So, Dad said after the photographer finished, his voice carrying that familiar edge of disappointment. What's next for you? Still planning to play with computers? I'm starting my job at Google next month, I said quietly. Mom raised an eyebrow. Google? That search engine company? I thought you'd eventually come to your senses and apply to law school. Actually, I said, my voice steady despite the hurt burning in my chest. I've been accepted to Harvard Law's JD/MBA program. Full scholarship. I could start next fall if I wanted. Dad's expression shifted slightly. Really? You never mentioned. I turned it down, I continued. I'm going to Google instead. The disappointment returned to his face, sharper than before. Of course you did. You know, Sarah, there comes a point where we have to stop enabling this phase you're going through. Phase? I asked. This whole technology obsession, Mom said, her voice taking on that patient tone she used when explaining things to children. It's not a real career, sweetheart. It's not stable. Look at Emma. She'll have a corner office on Wall Street by 30. That's success. That's something we can be proud of. I felt something inside me crack. 4 years of their disappointment, 4 years of being compared to Emma, 4 years of having my passion dismissed as a phase. It all crystallized in that moment. You know what, Dad? I said, my voice surprisingly calm. You're right. I think it's time we all acknowledge the truth here. He nodded approvingly, thinking I was about to agree with him. You're not family anymore, he said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used in boardrooms. Don't embarrass us by walking around claiming to be a Morrison. You've made your choice to throw away everything we've given you. Mom nodded, her attention already shifting back to Emma as she adjusted my sister's honor cord, the golden rope that marked her academic achievements. Emma looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything to defend me. I stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in. Not family anymore. Because I chose innovation over tradition. Because I chose to build something instead of manipulating existing systems for profit. Okay, I said simply. I understand. They looked surprised by my calm acceptance. Dad probably expected an argument, tears, maybe begging for forgiveness. Instead, I just smiled peacefully. If you'll excuse me, I said, I think they're about to announce the scholarship awards. I walked away from them feeling oddly liberated. For 4 years I'd carried the weight of their disappointment, always hoping that someday they'd understand, that someday they'd be proud. Now that hope was gone, and with it, a burden I hadn't realized was crushing me. The scholarship ceremony was held in the main auditorium, with graduates and families filtering in to hear about the various awards and recognitions. I took a seat near the back, alone. I could see my family several rows ahead. Dad checking his phone, Mom whispering something to Emma, all of them clearly wanting to leave. Dean Rodriguez took the stage, his voice carrying easily through the microphone. Today we're not just celebrating graduation. We're celebrating the innovations and achievements that will shape our future. He began with smaller awards, excellence in various subjects, community service recognitions, research achievements. Each winner walked across the stage to polite applause. Now, Dean Rodriguez continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, we come to our most prestigious award. The Morrison Family Tech Innovation Scholarship. I froze. The Morrison Family Tech Innovation Scholarship? I looked toward my parents, but they seemed as confused as I was. This $2 million scholarship, the dean continued, was established anonymously 3 years ago to support students who demonstrate exceptional innovation in technology with real-world applications. The donor specifically requested that the recipient show not just technical skill, but the ability to use technology to solve meaningful problems. $2 million. I watched my father's expression change from confusion to interest. Mom was leaning forward now, suddenly paying attention. This year's recipient, Dean Rodriguez said, pausing for dramatic effect, has not only excelled academically but has already filed 3 patents for AI-driven educational tools that are being implemented in underprivileged schools across California. My heart started racing. 3 patents. That was me. I was the only student in my class with 3 patents, all for the adaptive learning platform I'd been building. This student has also founded a startup that has already received $15 million in series of funding from major venture capital firms. My mouth went dry. How did they know about the funding? I'd kept that information private, shared only with the university's startup incubator program. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Rodriguez announced, his voice rising with excitement, the Morrison Family Tech Innovation Scholarship goes to... I could see my father turning in his seat, probably trying to spot which student would be walking across the stage. Mom was whispering something to Emma, both of them looking curious about who would receive such a prestigious award. Sarah Morrison. The auditorium erupted in applause, but all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. I sat frozen for a moment, unable to process what had just happened. The Morrison Family Tech Innovation Scholarship. Had my parents secretly donated money to create a scholarship in our family name? Sarah Morrison, please come to the stage. I stood on shaky legs and began walking down the aisle. As I passed my family's row, I saw Dad's face drain of all color. Mom's mouth was hanging open. Emma was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. When I reached the stage, Dean Rodriguez shook my hand warmly. Congratulations, Sarah. Your work in educational technology is truly groundbreaking. Thank you, I managed to say into the microphone he handed me. But I have to ask, the Morrison family name on the scholarship. Dean Rodriguez smiled. Ah yes, that was the donor's specific request. They said they wanted to honor a family that understood the value of innovation and education. I looked out at the audience and then it hit me. I turned back to the dean. Who was the donor? Well, he said, his voice carrying through the auditorium, since you're the recipient, I think I can share that information. The donor was Morrison Industries Educational Foundation. Morrison Industries. My heart stopped. That was the name of my startup. The company I'd founded and kept secret from my family. The company that had just received $15 million in funding. You see, Dean Rodriguez continued, addressing the audience, Ms. Morrison didn't just win this scholarship, she funded it. 3 years ago, when she was still a sophomore, she approached the university with a proposal. She wanted to create a scholarship for students like herself, those whose families might not understand the value of technological innovation. The pieces fell into place. 3 years ago, when my parents had been particularly vocal about their disappointment in my career choice, I'd taken some of the early profits from my app development work and established the foundation. I'd wanted to help other students whose families didn't support their tech ambitions. I'd never imagined I'd be the recipient of my own scholarship. "Ms. Morrison," the dean said, turning back to me, "would you like to say a few words?" I took the microphone with trembling hands and looked out at the audience. My eyes found my parents immediately. Dad looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mom was clutching Emma's arms so tightly that my sister was wincing. "3 years ago," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "I sat in a dorm room listening to my parents tell me that computer science wasn't a real career, that I was wasting my potential, that I was embarrassing our family." The auditorium was completely silent. I established this scholarship because I knew there were other students out there whose families didn't understand what we were trying to build. Students who were told they were playing with toys instead of pursuing real careers. I could see people in the audience nodding, recognizing the experience. "Technology isn't just about making money," I continued. "It's about solving problems. The apps I've built help children in underserved communities access personalized education. The AI systems I've developed help teachers identify students who are struggling before they fall behind. The patents I've filed aren't just intellectual property, they're tools that can help level the playing field for millions of kids." I paused, looking directly at my parents. "A few minutes ago, my father told me I wasn't family anymore because I chose innovation over tradition. He said I was embarrassing the Morrison name." Dad was shaking his head slightly, probably hoping I wouldn't air our family drama in public. "But here's the thing," I said, my voice growing stronger. "The Morrison name isn't on this scholarship because of our family's legacy. It's here because I put it there. Because I wanted to honor what the Morrison name could represent: innovation, education, and using success to lift others up." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous roar. Students were standing, faculty were clapping, and I could see several people wiping their eyes. As I walked off the stage, clutching the $2 million scholarship check that was technically a payment from my own company to myself, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of seeking my parents' approval was finally gone. I didn't go back to sit with my family. Instead, I walked out of the auditorium and into the bright California sunshine. My phone was already buzzing with congratulations from professors, classmates, and mentors who had believed in me when my own family couldn't. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "Dad." "Sarah." His voice was strained, barely controlled. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I asked calmly. How did you, the scholarship, $2 million? "Actually, Dad, it's $2 million every year for the next 10 years. I wanted to make sure it could help a lot of students." Silence on the other end. "Your startup," he finally said. $15 million in funding? Series A, I confirmed. "We're projecting Series B next year at a much higher valuation. The AI platform is being adopted by school districts across the country." More silence. "Sarah, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Dad. You made it very clear. I'm not family anymore because I chose to embarrass the Morrison name with my computer games." "I didn't mean." "You meant exactly what you said. And you know what? You were right. I'm not the same kind of Morrison you and Mom are. I'm the kind who builds things instead of just managing other people's money. I'm the kind who uses success to help others instead of just accumulating status symbols." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. "The Google job?" he asked weakly. "Starts Monday. Senior software engineer position. They recruited me specifically because of the educational AI work." "When, Dad?" "They also offered me a signing bonus that's more than most lawyers make in 5 years." I hung up before he could respond. An hour later, as I was packing up my dorm room, Emma knocked on my door. She looked shaken, uncertain. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded, continuing to fold my clothes. "I had no idea," she said quietly. "About the company, the patents, any of it." "I know. Why didn't you tell us?" I stopped packing and looked at her. During one of the conversations where Mom and Dad explained how I was wasting my life. During one of the family dinners where you all discussed my future like I wasn't in the room." Emma sat down on my desk chair. They're pretty shaken up." "I imagine they are. Dad's been calling everyone he knows, trying to understand what just happened. He had no idea startup funding worked the way it does. Mom's Googling your patents." I smiled grimly. Learning about technology now that there's money involved? Sarah, I'm sorry. We all are. I should have defended you, should have. Emma, I interrupted gently. I don't need an apology. I needed support 4 years ago. I needed a family who believed in me 4 years ago. What I need now is space to build the life I want without constantly justifying my choices to people who think success only looks one way. My phone buzzed with a text. Then another. Then a flood of them. Emma glanced at my phone. Your parents. I looked at the messages. Dad, we need to discuss your future immediately. Mom, family dinner Sunday. We have things to talk about. Dad, I've been thinking about investment opportunities. Mom, your sister mentioned you might need business advice. I showed Emma the messages. She winced. They want to be involved now, she said. Now that there's money, they want to help manage my career. Now that there's prestige, they want to claim credit for supporting me. I finished packing and zipped up my suitcase. Where will you go? Emma asked. I have an apartment in Palo Alto near Google. I've been planning this move for months. Will you answer their calls? I thought about it for a moment. Maybe someday. When they're ready to know me as I actually am, not as a reflection of their expectations or a source of money to manage. Emma nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I always was, even when I didn't show it. Thanks, Em. That means something. As I walked out of my dorm room for the last time, my phone rang again. This time it was Dean Rodriguez. Sarah, I hope you don't mind the call. I wanted to personally thank you again. Of course, Dean Rodriguez. I also wanted to let you know, we've had 17 students approach us in the last hour asking about applying for next year's Morrison Family Tech Innovation Scholarship. Your speech inspired them. I smiled, feeling warmth spread through my chest. That's exactly what I hoped for. There's something else. Stanford's Board of Trustees would like to discuss expanding the program. They're wondering if you might be interested in creating additional scholarships, perhaps a full fellowship program. I'd be very interested in that conversation. Excellent. Also, I should mention, there are 3 venture capital firms that have reached out asking for your contact information. Apparently, word about Morrison Industries is spreading quickly. I laughed. It's going to be an interesting week. As I drove away from Stanford heading toward my new life in Palo Alto, I thought about the path that had led me here. 4 years of being told I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or ambitious enough in the right ways. 4 years of being compared to Emma and found wanting. 4 years of having my passion dismissed as a phase. But those 4 years had also taught me something valuable. The only approval I needed was my own. The only validation that mattered was the impact I could make on the world. My phone buzzed with another call from Dad. I let it go to voicemail. 2 hours later, settled in my new apartment, I finally listened to the message. Sarah, it's your father. I think I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. I've spent the afternoon researching your company and I'm impressed. More than impressed. I had no idea what you were building. I'd like to take you to dinner this week. If you're willing. I think I have a lot to learn about who you really are. I saved the message but didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and began coding. I had a new feature to build for the educational platform, one that would help even more kids access quality learning tools. Real work. Work that mattered. Outside my window, the lights of Silicon Valley twinkled like stars. Somewhere out there were other students like me, other innovators whose families didn't understand their dreams yet. Students who might apply for the Morrison Family Tech Innovation Scholarship next year. Students who would know that success wasn't about meeting other people's expectations. It was about building something meaningful and using that success to lift others up. I coded until midnight, building the future one line at a time. The annual Patterson family reunion was always held at Uncle Rick's sprawling lakeside mansion in upstate New York. Every August, 3 generations of Pattersons would gather for a weekend of barbecues, boat rides, and the inevitable competitions that seemed to define our family dynamics. This year was no different, except that I'd been dreading it more than usual. I'd been working for the federal government for 8 years now, ever since graduating from Georgetown with degrees in finance and cybersecurity. What my family didn't understand, what I'd deliberately kept vague, was the nature of my actual work. When they asked, I simply said I worked for a government agency, doing financial investigations. It was technically true. I just left out the part about being a senior special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, specializing in money laundering, tax evasion, and white-collar criminal enterprises. The secrecy wasn't just about privacy. It was about survival in a family where success was measured in dollar signs and social status, and where Uncle Rick had appointed himself the ultimate authority on both. Rick Patterson had built a construction empire over 30 years, starting with small residential projects and expanding into commercial developments across 3 states. Patterson Construction was worth an estimated $50 million, and Rick never let anyone forget it. He owned the biggest house, drove the most expensive cars, and treated family gatherings like board meetings where he held court and dispensed judgment on everyone else's life choices. I was his favorite target. "Sarah's still playing with computers for the government," he'd announced at last year's reunion, causing the entire deck to erupt in laughter. "Must be nice having job security even if the pay is terrible." What made it worse was that the rest of the family went along with it. Dad, Rick's younger brother, had spent his career in middle management and had always lived in Rick's shadow. My cousins, Rick's kids, had all joined the family business and were doing well financially, but they seemed to inherit their father's need to put others down to feel important. This year I'd almost declined the invitation entirely. But something had changed in my work life recently, something that made me curious about how this year's reunion might unfold. For the past 6 months, I'd been leading a joint task force investigating a complex money laundering operation involving construction companies, shell corporations, and offshore banking. The case, codenamed Foundation, had started with suspicious banking patterns and evolved into a massive investigation spanning multiple states and involving dozens of businesses. We were close to making arrests. I arrived at Uncle Rick's house Saturday afternoon, driving my modest Honda Civic and carrying the same worn duffel bag I'd been using for family trips since college. Rick was holding court by the pool, entertaining a group of relatives with stories about his latest business acquisition. "Sarah," he called out when he spotted me. "There's our little government bureaucrat. Still pushing papers and living off taxpayer money." The group chuckled appreciatively. I smiled and waved, then went inside to greet other family members and avoid the inevitable interrogation about my career choices. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Throughout the afternoon and evening, Rick made sure to include me in conversations just long enough to make some dismissive comment about government work, public sector salaries, or my apparent lack of ambition. Each comment was designed to position himself as the successful entrepreneur and me as the underachieving relative who'd chosen security over success. "Sarah could have done something real with her finance degree," he told a group of cousins during dinner. "Instead, she's counting beans for Uncle Sam." "At least she has benefits," my cousin Jake laughed. "Can't get fired from a government job, right?" "True," Rick agreed. "Though I suppose when you're not contributing anything meaningful to society, job security is all you've got." I ate my barbecue and smiled politely, letting the familiar sting of their dismissal wash over me. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that I'd spent the morning reviewing surveillance footage of Rick's construction sites, bank records showing suspicious cash deposits, and wire transfer patterns that painted a very clear picture of systematic tax evasion and money laundering. Rick Patterson wasn't just a successful businessman. He was the centerpiece of our investigation. Sunday morning brought the traditional family softball game, followed by the annual career updates session where everyone shared their professional accomplishments from the past year. It was Rick's favorite tradition, since it gave him a platform to announce new contracts, property acquisitions, and business expansions while everyone else offered more modest updates. We gathered on the deck overlooking the lake, mimosas and coffee in hand, while Rick prepared to hold court. "All right, everyone," he began, standing at the head of the group like a CEO addressing shareholders. "Time for our annual check-in. Let's see what the Patterson family has accomplished this year." He started with his own updates, naturally. Patterson Construction had landed a $15 million municipal contract. They'd opened a new office in Albany. Revenue was up 40% from the previous year. "Not bad for a guy who started with a pickup truck and a toolbox 30 years ago," he concluded to appreciative applause. My cousins followed with their updates. Jake had been promoted to project manager. Lisa had successfully bid on several new developments. Mark had expanded the company's equipment leasing division. When it came to my turn, the deck went quiet with anticipation. This was always the moment when Rick would find some way to diminish whatever I shared. Well, I began, it's been an interesting year. I got a promotion to senior special agent level, which was nice. Senior special agent, Rick repeated with amusement. Sounds very official. What does a senior special agent do that a regular special agent doesn't? Mostly leadership responsibilities. Managing task forces, coordinating with other agencies, overseeing complex investigations. Complex investigations, he laughed. Like what, tracking down people who fudged their tax returns? The group chuckled and I could see family members exchanging glances that said, here we go again. You'll never amount to anything, Rick continued, his voice getting louder and more theatrical. Still working that little government job? Everyone laughed and I could see the familiar dynamic playing out. Rick was performing for his audience, establishing his dominance over the family disappointment. I mean, Sarah, he continued, when are you going to stop playing games and do something real with your life? You're 34 years old. You could have been running your own business by now, making real money, building something meaningful. The laughter had died down, but I could see heads nodding in agreement. Even Dad was staying silent, unwilling to challenge his older brother's assessment. Government work is fine for people who want to coast, Rick went on, really warming to his theme now. But you were always one of the smart ones. You could have been something important. I stood up slowly, setting down my mimosa glass. You know what, Uncle Rick? You're absolutely right. He looked surprised by my agreement, clearly expecting more resistance. I should stop playing games, I continued. I should do something meaningful. Excuse me for just a moment. I walked into the house, leaving behind a deck full of confused relatives. In the bathroom, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my task force coordinator. Proceed with the operation. I'm on site and ready. The response came back immediately. Units are in position. Give us 5 minutes. I waited exactly 5 minutes, then walked back outside to the deck where my family was still gathered, now discussing my strange behavior. Sorry about that, I said, retaking my seat. Where were we? We were discussing your career choices, Rick said with renewed confidence. I think you were about to acknowledge that government work isn't exactly a path to success. Actually, Uncle Rick, I wanted to ask you about your success. Patterson Construction has done remarkably well recently. His chest puffed with pride. 40% revenue growth this year alone. That's impressive. A lot of cash flow for a construction company. Cash is king in this business, Sarah. You'd understand if you worked in the real world. I'm curious about something, I continued conversationally. Do you handle all that cash through traditional banking channels? Rick's smile faltered slightly. What kind of question is that? Oh, just professional curiosity. In my little government job, I see a lot of businesses struggling with cash management, regulatory compliance, that sort of thing. We handle our finances perfectly legally, he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. I'm sure you do. Though I have to say, some of the cash deposit patterns I've seen in construction companies can look unusual to untrained eyes. The deck had gone quiet. Family members were looking back and forth between us, sensing tension but not understanding the source. Sarah, Dad said nervously, maybe we should change the subject. Actually, Dad, I think this is a perfect time to share some exciting news about my work. I stood up again, and this time I could see 3 figures in dark suits walking around the side of the house toward the deck. You see, Uncle Rick, you're right that I've been working a little government job. But you might be interested to know that my little job involves investigating financial crimes. Money laundering, tax evasion, that sort of thing. Rick's face had gone pale. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Operation Foundation, a 6-month investigation into a money laundering network involving construction companies in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. The 3 FBI agents had reached the deck now, and I could see family members noticing them with growing alarm. Rick Patterson? Said Agent Martinez, the task force leader, stepping forward with his badge visible. Yes. Rick's voice was barely a whisper. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. The deck erupted in shocked exclamations as Agent Martinez began reading Rick his rights. Agent Chin moved to secure the perimeter while Agent Rodriguez coordinated with local law enforcement units that were arriving to search the property. This is a mistake, Rick said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah, tell them this is a mistake. I looked at him calmly. Uncle Rick, for 6 months my task force has been tracking cash deposits, wire transfers, and banking patterns associated with Patterson Construction. We've documented systematic underreporting of income, use of shell companies to hide assets, and coordination with other businesses to launder money through construction projects. The family was staring at me in complete shock. Dad looked like he might faint. He whispered. You've been investigating Rick? I've been investigating a criminal enterprise, I corrected. The fact that it involved Uncle Rick was professionally awkward. How long have you known? Rick asked as Agent Martinez secured handcuffs around his wrists. Known that you were involved? About 3 months. But I recused myself from the direct investigation at that point and let my team handle the evidence gathering. 3 months. Mom gasped. You've known for 3 months and still came to family gatherings? My job is to investigate financial crimes, not to warn criminals that they're under investigation, I said simply. That would be obstruction of justice. As the agents led Rick away, he turned back to look at me. This isn't over, Sarah. I'll fight this. Uncle Rick, I said quietly, we have 18 months of financial records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations with your co-conspirators, and documentation of $12 million in unreported income. The case is actually very much over. The next few hours were a blur of activity. FBI teams searched the house and grounds while family members sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. Several relatives left immediately, not wanting to be associated with the scene. Others stayed and peppered me with questions I mostly couldn't answer due to the ongoing investigation. Dad pulled me aside as the search teams were finishing up. Sarah, I need to understand what just happened. What happened is that Uncle Rick has been running a criminal enterprise for years and finally got caught. But you're FBI? Senior Special Agent, Financial Crimes Division. I specialize in white-collar criminal investigations. For how long? 8 years. Since I graduated from Georgetown. Dad sat down heavily on a deck chair. 8 years. We've been making fun of your government job for 8 years and you're actually what, Dad? Actually someone important. Someone who matters. I looked at my father, this man who had spent my entire adult life apologizing for my career choices, making excuses for my lack of traditional success, and enabling his brother's constant criticism. Dad, I've always been important. I've always mattered. My job has always been meaningful. The fact that Uncle Rick couldn't see past his own prejudices about government work doesn't change that. But we didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked. When I told you I worked in financial investigations, you assumed that meant something boring and unimportant. When I said I specialized in white-collar crime, you tuned out because it wasn't as exciting as construction contracts. Dad was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? He asked finally. Now Uncle Rick goes through the legal system. He'll be charged, probably tried, and if convicted, sentenced according to federal guidelines for financial crimes. What about the family business? That depends on how deeply the other employees were involved. If Jake and Lisa and Mark were just employees who didn't know about the illegal activities, they might be able to continue operating legitimately. If they were active participants. I shrugged. How much trouble is Rick in? I thought about the evidence we'd compiled. Bank records showing $12 million in unreported income. Shell companies used to hide assets. Coordination with other businesses to launder money through fake construction projects. Bribery of municipal officials to secure contracts. A lot of trouble, Dad. Federal sentencing guidelines for money laundering and tax evasion are severe, especially when the amounts are this large. As I drove home that evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from family members. Some wanted details about the investigation. Some wanted to know if they were in legal jeopardy. Some just wanted to express shock and confusion about the day's events. I ignored most of them. Tomorrow, I'd return to work and continue building cases against other financial criminals. Tonight, I just wanted to process what had happened and what it meant for my family relationships going forward. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 8 years, Uncle Rick had dismissed my career as meaningless government work. He'd positioned himself as the family success story while treating me like an underachiever who'd chosen security over ambition. It turned out that my meaningless government work had been building a case that would likely send him to federal prison for several years and destroy the business empire he was so proud of. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I thought about next year's family reunion. Assuming there was one, it would certainly be different. Uncle Rick would probably be in federal prison. The family business might not exist. And everyone would finally understand what a senior special agent actually does for a living. Sometimes justice takes time. But when it arrives completely. 3 months later, I received a call from Dad. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that Rick took a plea deal." "I know, Dad." I was briefed on the terms. 18 months in federal prison, full restitution, forfeiture of assets. It was a good deal for him. Given the evidence, he could have gotten much longer. The business is shutting down. Jake and Lisa are looking for new jobs. I felt a pang of sympathy for my cousins, who had genuinely seemed unaware of their father's criminal activities. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you proud of me now?" There was a long silence on the other end. "Sarah, I was always proud of you. I never understood what you were doing. I thought success had to look like Rick's success. I thought building wealth was the only thing that mattered. And now I realize that what you do, protecting people from criminals, making sure the system works fairly, that's actually more important than anything Rick ever built." It was a start. "Dad, next year if there's a family reunion, maybe we can talk about something other than career achievements." "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd really like that." As I hung up the phone, I thought about the inscription on the FBI seal. Fidelity, bravery, integrity. For 8 years, I'd lived those values while my family dismissed my work as unimportant. But values don't become less important just because other people don't understand them. And sometimes, living those values means standing up to people you love, even when it costs you. Even when it costs them everything.